All right, man, peace. So in the aftermath of the quote-unquote tragic shooting at the bar in Thousand Oaks, California, the NBA has decided that they were going to have many of the teams in the National Basketball Association do what they normally do, that being wear T-shirts to show that the NBA is sensitive to many of the current events that are transpiring in America's society on an everyday basis. Why is that? Because the NBA is trying to market itself as a woke league, because they are beholden to certain cultural Marxist forces that are going to use the NBA to try to socially engineer society. And I've been telling you, brothers, for a very long time, that is why the powers that be, i.e. the cultural Marxists, i.e. the international bankers, are so upset with the NFL, because they're trying to engineer the NFL so that they can use the NFL to socially engineer society. Why am I saying all this? Because I've been touching on a series of sentiments on this channel for a very long time pertaining to the agenda to make people think that athletes are actually societal leaders, and they're not. And this notion is especially promoted in the NBA and the NFL, where, of course, the majority of those athletes are so-called black. And I state this all the time. You, as an individual so-called black man, have every right to lead that all these other so-called prominent black athletes have, particularly yourself and in your household. Everybody knows my perspective is that the so-called black man has to turn his head, turn his face back to the Most High so that he can be led properly. That's why we have scriptures. That's why we have a law code. Of course, you have the wokety woke, pro-blackety blacks who want to talk about this and that, and the Bible's the white man's book, and Kemet. That's a topic for another day. Point being is this, that your favorite athletes in the NBA and in the NFL, they're Luciferians, i.e. Masons, meaning what? They're company men. They're corporate men. The difference is that the corporation that they're beholden to is that lodge or that brotherhood or that fraternity. And they're going to say whatever they need to say to maintain proper standing in that fraternity. And I'm not just talking about the boule, which, as we know, has a direct correlation to skull and bones, etc. I'm also talking about the way that many of these prominent athletes basically are just watchdogs or pawns or ambassadors for big business corporations like Nike or Reebok or Adidas or Under Armour, etc. Meaning what? They really cannot be trusted, because they've been detached from the so-called black community for a very long time. That's why they're not real leaders. And for the most part, when they try to act as if they're leading, it's all for theatrics. It's all for the consumption of the masses. It's not real. And one of the main talking points that gets pushed or is getting promoted by many of the cultural Marxists, many of these super liberals in the NBA, is this nonsense about quote-unquote gun control. And when you evaluate most of these so-called mass shootings all across America, they're normally executed with illegal guns. And that's not even delving into the aspect of the Manchurian candidates, which the vast majority of these mass shooters are. So anyway, they're going to cover this issue in regards to the shooting that occurred at the bar in Thousand Oaks, California. And LeBron James, of course, is going to chime in because he's been marketing himself as this cultural reformer, as this leader of so-called black people. We all know that, or at least those of us who are paying attention know that he's just a corporate whore posing. But listen very closely to how he represents himself, how he projects himself, and how it's very clear that he has no understanding of what's going on, but he has to read off a company line. The company line is not only for Nike, but also for the NBA. These athletes are not allowed to come on camera and say, look, the mass shootings have nothing to do with the gun laws, because most lawful gun owners handle their guns in an appropriate fashion. Most of these mass shootings are being executed using illegal guns, but you can't say that, because if you say that, you're allegedly co-signing these disastrous events. So anyway, they're going to talk about it. I'm going to chime in.
All right, before we move on, I do want to address this. Last week's deadly attacks in Thousand Oaks, those were the 307th mass shooting in the United States this year. A year which we also saw 17 people, most of them children, gunned down in Parkland, Florida, 11 killed in Pittsburgh, 10 in Santa Fe, and NBA players, some of whom participated in anti-gun violence PSAs last season, they are continuing to call for change.
Let me say this very quickly in regards to the mass shootings. Many of them, at least the ones that are projected on television or presented to the masses on television, are executed by Manchurian candidates. But the real question is, what is galvanizing so many people to grab up weapons and kill other people? Even if we want to separate what is occurring in regards to the mass shootings from the notion of a Manchurian candidate, which is just a mind-controlled assassin. Even if you don't adhere to that, to that understanding, we have to try to evaluate the overall psychology of this society to ask ourselves, why are there so many people living with this sense of despair where they feel like not only that they want to kill themselves, but they want to bring as much pain unto others as possible before they go? What is going on in how we're living and what we're teaching in this society that's making so many people so miserable? Just outside of the mass shootings, the way in which prescription drug abuse has skyrocketed in America, which obviously is a telltale sign of depression. What is going on in America that so many people feel like they're so psychologically moribund and destitute that they have to turn to drugs or they have to lash out in a way to bring pain to other people? It's very obvious that there's a severe lack of contentment in this society.
Over the weekend, players from the Lakers, Clippers, Bucks, and Hawks all warmed up for their games in shirts that said "Enough" on the front, then named the Thousand Oaks victims on the back. The Clippers' Tobias Harris summed up the players' sentiment here, quote, "We believe gun violence is something that needs to be brought up and gotten under control."
No, you don't really believe that gun violence is something that needs to be gotten under control. You believe that people having a weapon on them is something that you think needs to be brought under control based off of your own personal and oftentimes low-level understanding of the capacity with which people are handling weapons and how that has an effect on these so-called mass shootings. Because once again, the vast majority of these mass shooters and people who have psychological issues of that sort are using illegal guns. And for every person involved in one of these traumatic, disastrous events, there are 10,000 people who are legal gun owners who handle their weapons responsibly.
Personally, my condolences go out to the families, everyone that lost loved ones. My prayers go out to them. But at the end of the day, action has to be taken from this because there can only be so many prayers and so many condolences.
Once again, this is why Laura Ingraham stated, "Just shut up and dribble." And I know that a lot of people are not going to like this, and they're going to feel like I'm trying to marginalize these athletes. But there's a reason why there's a notion called a dumb jock. And I'm not trying to imply that every athlete or professional athlete is dumb or uninformed or idiotic or unaware to any degree. But you do have to be capable of speaking on serious topics with a level of information and expertise, especially serious topics like this. Because if you're not a three-dimensional thinker, you're going to lead with your emotions, and you're not going to be cognizant of how many people you're going to be affecting on the other side when you make blanket statements.
And here's LeBron James describing what went through his mind when he first heard about the Thousand Oaks shootings.
I guarantee you not much went through LeBron James's mind, because there's not much going on in LeBron James's mind other than making sure that he can amplify his profile and make people think that he's the new Muhammad Ali. There's nothing real about LeBron James when it comes to trying to speak on these topics. He's just not mentally competent enough to speak on these topics. And I'm not even speaking about from an informational perspective or even from a cognitive function perspective, even though those two components are pertinent in this issue as well, because no disrespect to the brother. There are people who are born with a certain genius in their field, and LeBron James is a genius when it comes to basketball. But when it comes to speaking about real issues, he's not a three-dimensional thinker. He thinks a lot like a woman. No disrespect to him. And you could tell by his gesticulations, by his facial expressions, by his reactions, that he has a lot of feminine energy in him. But you know what? Let's let him answer, and we're going to evaluate certain things about LeBron James.
Probably the same that went through everybody's mind. Not again. Oh, wow. What the hell? Probably some more explicit terms that I won't say right here.
Well, you know what, brother? No disrespect, but getting explicit does not make what you have to say any more relevant or less relevant or any more potent or less potent. Either you have an understanding on what you're speaking about or you don't. And the media continues to try to flock around these professional athletes to ask them about serious questions and serious issues, as opposed to going around and speaking to the real people who will be affected by any possible law change in a real way. Because at the end of the day, LeBron James can get on TV and make a big show about gun control and gun laws, but I guarantee you, he owns guns, and certainly his bodyguards own guns. So if LeBron James is truly as sincere about gun control as he tries to act like he is, he should tell all his armed guards, you're no longer going to carry guns. Now you're going to carry butter knives, plastic butter knives, and you're going to defend me, my wife, and my children with those butter knives and with your martial arts. I guarantee you he's not going to do that. But he's a corporate whore, not just for Nike, but also for the NBA. Once again, Adam Silver is a super liberal Caucasian Jew who's running the NBA. His job is to promote cultural Marxism. And LeBron James is one of his quote-unquote boy toys when it comes to that, meaning what? He has to go out and read the company line, the same way that he does for Phil Knight. That's his job, and they make sure that they keep his bank account full in return.
Just how do we clean up this? I think it all comes back to this gun situation that we have in America.
So how does the NBA feel about all these players taking a stand? Here's what Commissioner Adam Silver told ESPN's Omnium Nisuk, quote, "As I have always said, our players aren't just ball players, they're citizens."
They're also servants to you, Adam Silver. We all know that. You send t-shirts to certain teams and you say your players are going to wear these t-shirts before the game. Bottom line.
They have strong feelings about what is happening in society and they react to them.
Yes, they react to what's happening in society with quote-unquote strong feelings, as long as those strong feelings are copacetic to what you want them to say. I'm still waiting for a player in the NBA to say, you know what occurred in Thousand Oaks, what occurred in Parkland, Florida is terrible, but it really has nothing to do with gun control. It really has to do with people acquiring illegal guns and not being psychologically stable or mentally responsible.
Again, I support our players' desire to speak out on the issues that are important to them and important to society.
Yes, as long as it goes along with what you want them to promote. If a player was to speak out and say that homosexuality is destroying the black community, that lesbianism is hurting the black community because it's tearing down the framework of the family, of the man as the head, which is the only functional paradigm that has ever worked in regards to maintaining stability, contentment, and productivity in any community, Adam Silver, you would be the first person to castigate that athlete and tell him that he can no longer compete in the NBA. That would be first after suspending him for about 50 games. You let him come back to make a little bit of show of it. At the end of the season, you would have his team tear up his contract.
Strong message from the commissioner. The Players Association has echoed it as well. We'll be back after this break.
Also, please keep in mind Rachel Nichols, another talking head on TV. You'll always find that most of these super liberal women, they love to talk about gun control. Why is that? Because the gun represents authority. And more often than not, the gun is associated with the masculine principle, even though you have many women who own guns. And I guarantee you that if this was an issue where a woman was protecting herself, allegedly protecting herself, and used a gun to kill a man, Rachel Nichols would have no problem with gun ownership or the utilization of a gun in an aggressive manner. I promise you that. But it is what it is. We'll see where this goes in regards to the NBA being used as a proxy to push quote-unquote gun control. So peace.